That's a really good question.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We are going to bring this meeting to order. Today is Monday, February 5th. The mayor's traveling, and so I'm going to preside over the meeting this evening. We'll start with introductions, and we'll start to my left.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Victoria Watlington, at large.
Luana Mayfield, Councilmember at Large.
George McCarty, District 6.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Dante Anderson, Mayor Pro Tem, District 1.
Dimple Ashmira, at large.
Good evening, Marjorie Molina, District 5.
Ariel Smith, Lead City Clerk.
Excellent. So as you all know, today was our full day of committee meetings, and as we agreed as a full council, we are going to begin to use this first Monday of the month meeting a little bit differently than we had over last term. So today we're going to have a truncated overview from our committee chairs around the most salient, important topics that came up. And then we're going to spend some time talking about one of the key topics that is top of mind for us that we'll be voting on in the future, potentially next week, which is our quality of life ordinances. So first, I want to kick it off, and I'll start at the top of the morning with Mr. Driggs with the Transportation and Planning Committee.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, Mayor Pro Tem. So the members of the Transportation Planning and Development Committee are myself as Chair, Ms. Molina as Vice Chair, and Council Members Graham, Johnson, and Watlington. We had three topics of conversation. One was an update on CATS, where we were heard that the ongoing remediation process at CATS continues. No big breakthrough news there. The FTA review is near completion, so we expect to get that report from the feds in the near term. And the transition to the new bus management service is occurring right now, is going on over the next couple of weeks. There was a question raised in committee about the status of the repairs to the trucks. And this is part of what we were told already about the process of remediation of issues at CATS. Basically, those are being sent out, and I think, Mr. Cagle, if you're here, perhaps you could give us just a quick highlight on that one.
Yes, sir. Brent Cagle, Interim CEO for CATS. Good evening, everyone. So there were questions about the status of what we call the truck maintenance contract. Trucks are the wheel assemblies on a train. There are 3 sets of trucks per light rail vehicle. So we entered into a contract in July. First, we sought approval from City Council in April of 2023 to amend an existing contract with Siemens, entered into that contract with Siemens in July. To conduct truck overhaul maintenance on all of the fleet. As we were working through this with Siemens, we also added a technology system, a new technology system, which will be the first implemented such system in the United States for light rail vehicles. This technology system is implemented across the world, just not in the United States yet. So we view the contract as a win for Charlotte, as well as for all of our passengers. Total value on the contract is $58.6 million. That contract, again, covers the entire fleet plus the technology system, and it meets our heavy maintenance or truck maintenance needs well into 2028. By working with Siemens, we also expedited the contract. We were able to cut approximately 2.5 years off of the estimated delivery of all of this work by working with Siemens to expedite the work. The primary way that they are expediting the work is they have opened a second shop in Florida. Prior to this, all of the trucks went to California for service, and now they will go split between California and Florida for service, Florida representing a much shorter travel time. So where are we today? All of those contracts are in place. It did take Siemens a little bit to stand up the shop, do make-ready purchase the necessary equipment to do the maintenance and set it up in Florida. That is completed. As of today, the cash spend on the contract is $22 million. And by April of 2024, we expect to have received 10 truck sets back. So that's 30 total trucks. A truck set is the 3 trucks required per light rail vehicle. As well, Siemens is starting to install the technology system on vehicles. Once they install one set or the technology system on one vehicle, we will start the beta testing with Siemens with the expectation that the full fleet will be outfitted with the new technology system over the next 12 months. Again, I will note this puts us in a much better position to ensure that we do not end up behind on maintenance again, and it's all well within budget and has been accounted for in our reserves and as it's being paid for.
Thank you, Mr. Cagle. Within budget, meaning that because of the underinvestment in maintenance in the past, there were funds available at CATS to pay for this activity, so we're not actually incurring new commitments as a result of that. And the technology, just to explain, was a monitoring system for bearings, which would basically give us real-time indications of the health of the bearings, meaning not only that the risk of any failure of those wheel assemblies is reduced, but we're able to schedule maintenance on a more dynamic basis, like in your car when it tells you, okay, it's time to, it's not a rigid schedule, and that could give rise to more efficiencies. Was that a reasonable description?
That is exactly right. The new system is a predictive maintenance system and allows us to better plan that.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cagle.
Yes, sir.
So another topic we talked about in committee today was the referral the council made to our planning people about the N1 low-density development, and basically the duplexes and triplexes, what the mix should be, and so on. And essentially what Ms. Craig told us was that they were studying in particular 5-acre and larger sites, because those are ones that are subdivisions where you start to get into streets and things. So that's their particular focus. Her recommendation was that that she consult with the UDO advisory group, with that mix of people who have been, and develop a proposal to bring back to us based on our conversation with them. So I think that's where that's going. But what did happen in committee was a pretty lively discussion around what about locations smaller than 5 acres? Because a lot of the feedback we've been getting relates to development that's happening by right in those. So we asked that she interpret that referral that she got to include less than 5 acres, since we didn't specify in the referral what it was going to be. We also got a mobility update from Ed McKinney talking about our the way the projects that we've identified, 2,000 projects that we've been identified mobility, are now being shaped into 16 different districts and into a prioritization scheme in order to develop further. I suggested him in the meeting that it would be helpful to me and maybe to all of us if we could get a more comprehensive framework of the Connect Beyond, our strategic mobility plan, this newest plan, and so that we all understand what the interdependence is, I guess, right? We need, we're going to need some revenue source, hopefully next year. And so how does that inform the work that Ed's doing? So I think you understood that, and we expect to hear back from you about that, Ed. Thank you. And that's it for transportation. Does any committee member want to add something?
Thank you, Mr. Driggs, and I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Cagle for pulling together this information, because we asked him to do that today, so
Yeah.
very quick turnaround. Ms. Ashmere, you had a question?
Mr. Driggs, for the planning committee, from the planning staff, what you're looking at is 5 and above. So I didn't catch, what was the plan for development for 5 acres or below? 5 acres and below?
So essentially what the committee said to Ms. Craig was, everything you said about 5 and above is fine, but we want you to think about 5 and below, because that's a real issue for us, right? So the subdivision context that she was looking at is one thing, but these smaller sites and the juxtaposition of certain types of development is another. So she just said that she would work on that. We'll hear back from her.
So were there any recommendation from Ms. Craig on development of 5 acres and up?
And below now, based on the committee meeting today and our request, she's going to look at the issues. She said they're kind of different, right? So she's going to work on the 5 acres and above as a sort of subdivision topic, but then think about also the feedback she got from us on the smaller sites, which is where a lot of the pushback we're getting is coming from.
Got it. Okay, so we'll get more info on that.
We will. She'll
Okay.
follow up.
Okay, so there is no recommendations as of right now?
No, I think
Only-
the next thing will be for her to talk to
Okay.
the UDO advisory committee and shape up her thinking on some of these things, because what she did point out is it starts to branch out as you work on this. You realize that you're now. She did mention to us that she would be following up separately on, for example, the trees question.
Oh, okay. So, second item you had brought up was a mobility plan and 16 zones. I didn't quite follow that.
Well, this was we got teased with this a little bit during the retreat, but basically there are now 16 development areas that have been identified on the city map, and with sort of special needs in each location around the whole city. And the idea is now to take all of these projects that we have, the 2,000 ones, assign them to those geographies, look at the local needs, and think on a data-driven basis, taking into account safety, traffic flow, and issues like that, what our process would be for prioritizing within each of those. Is that?
got
Okay,
it.
all right, cool.
So do we have a list of those 16? That would be part of the strategic mobility plan booklet. Do we have those 16 areas?
Yes, that's the thing that, and if
It's
you
in the
look at our.
strategic mobility plan. Handout.
Well, maybe the manager can comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Ashmore, as we were trying to do as few presentations as possible at the annual strategy meeting, one of the things we kicked ourselves with is maybe we should have gone a little bit more in depth with these 16 strategic investment areas. And so what Ed was able to do today was to tease a little
That one.
bit.
Yeah,
That
that
Ed.
Yeah.
Today is, and so what we were going to do is just put it in your packet on Thursday, but we wanted to give you some context first today. And so we'll give you more information around those areas, but what Ed tried to do today was just to show you that they existed, over 2,000 projects, down to these 16 areas. And if you start to think about what we're doing in the corridors, add another 6 to those, and think about all that goes into building these areas. Some of it's infrastructure, some of it's business development. So we would take that in, and that's what Mr. Driggs was trying to say. These geographies are not all the same.
I thought I did say that.
You did.
So 2 other things, if I may, quickly. Ms. Craig pointed out to us that one of their considerations in this was these targeted growth areas. And so it wasn't clear to me, at least in the meeting, that those areas had been identified by council or agreed by council, or that the criteria for defining them. So I just suggested to her that if that was going to be a metric that they use, maybe we should know what it is, because it's not in our plan right now. And the other thing we talked about was the ETJ and how our process affects the ETJ areas, because we've been hearing from those. What I explained in the committee was that the ETJ falls under our jurisdiction pursuant to an interlocal agreement, right? So that if people in the ETJ feel that they're not represented, they can talk to their county commissioner and just say, look, you guys made the deal with the city, so, please talk to them about the concerns that we have. And they're in a special situation. So I think that was it.
Okay.
I will have more questions. I just need to look at the 16 areas. So once we have those, I'm sure council will have a say in how certain projects are prioritized. So that will be part of the next step, I guess.
I did warn Mr. McKinney he's going to get a call from each council member,
Exactly.
each district person, and to fasten his seatbelt.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So more to come on Thursday in the packets with that information.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, Mr. Manager, from our takeaway at the retreat, are we on track for a February vote by council? Again, not that council votes, but for us to be more locked into specific items in our appetite, like the Silver Line.
So thank you, Mr. McCarty. I would say that two things, I don't know if it's February, but we're definitely on track, and let me tell you why. So there were a few referrals that came out on Thursday from the mayor, one of which went to the TAP committee, that they began a bit of a discussion today around the projects. And then there's a work group that's going to talk a bit about, and I don't know the best way to say it, is how do you take those projects, look at what's in the strategic mobility plan, what's in the 2030 plan from CATS, and have something that is related to the city of Charlotte. So all I'm asking is that I think we're saying the same thing, but you're saying you want it now.
All that sounds great. I would encourage you guys to go back and re-listen to our discussion as a group and what we voted on, which was in February, we would bring forth whatever critical strategic level questions that we've never voted on as a body, and we will go down that path. And the one I then clarified after was, is the Silver Line something we are willing to table or not? Because either one is a fine answer. It's just, it means two different things, and we've never addressed it as a group.
Sure, and I'll take another crack at it, which I thought we were aligned, is that the prioritization of the projects related to rail is up to the MTC.
Yeah, but what we discussed, again, we don't need to rehash it all. I would request you and your leaders go back and re-listen to exactly what we said and agreed upon as a group. And I think if you do that, you'll see we said something very specific that did not overrule the MTC. It did not say this is what we're going to do. It said for Charlotte, one of multiple bodies that's part of the MTC, this is what we are willing or not willing to do.
We'll take a listen.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Driggs. We'll move on to Mr. Graham in the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. The committee met, as all committees did today. Vice Chairman Mitchell, Bakari, Driggs, and Moreno. We had 3 agenda items. As all committees did, we went over our performance management framework that we discussed at the retreat. This was a carryover. And the staff is aligned on those recommendations that came out. That was just for information only. The bulk of our meeting today was really centered around the impact of uptown vacancies. This topic was introduced to the committee at our January meeting. This was a part 2 version of that. Just for a summary, this was a policy referral to the committee to conduct a comprehensive review of other cities, to review initiatives underway, develop a framework for strategy policies on how the city might participate, and to propose for consideration of Phillips City Council any recommended strategies and or policies. And so that was the charge that the committee was given. Today's meeting was, as I said, part 2 of a discussion that started last month. Uptown vacancy and vacancy in general is not a topic just for Charlotte. It's something that we are facing nationwide. I refer everyone to a 60-minute piece that was done on the topic, I guess about in January as well, and I'll make sure that Tracy and I get it out to all the committee members. I think you'll really get a great understanding of the issue that we're confronting. For an example, just vacancy in Charlotte, the airport, there's 25% vacancy up there. Ballantyne, there's about 28% vacancy. University City, about 35% vacancy. As for Uptown Charlotte, there's 940 total floors in Uptown Charlotte, 940. 165 have full floors available. 22 sublease floors are available. 5 assets have 50% of available full floors, and 31% of all full floors available are within non-owner occupied buildings. So obviously there is an issue that we're confronting in Uptown Charlotte. Today we heard from Center City Partners. They had a design competition, and they kind of gave us their perspective of the work that they're doing in reference to uptown vacancies. They illustrated and gave an example of a number of projects based on their design competition of things we can do for uptown conversions, apartments, schools, a wide variety of other options that could be available, retail opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. One in particular that we discussed was the, Brooklyn and Church property, which was a design winner, as well as close proximity to Panther Stadium, and it's the old Duke Energy original building that is actually being converted right now, and or not being converted, but are going through the process of conversion with the proposal that they're looking at trying to see if they can make come to reality. That particular conversion talks about workforce development, programmatic funding and partnership, environmental lead, community space, housing. And so we took a look at that with some questions that we asked the committee to ponder. One is, was there an appetite for public investment in public and church? If so, what type of benefit would you like to see? And is tax increment grant or a TIG a potential tool? We had a robust discussion. I think we all were in a line that we ought to take another baby step forward in terms of working towards being a possible public participation, right? A baby step, not a full step. But a baby step, that we're willing to kick the tire, ask additional questions, ask staff to go back and give us a lot more information in reference to what other cities are doing, in reference to public investment in these type of projects. That was a great discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. The problem, like I said, is not uniquely Charlotte. There are no best case examples nationwide that we can go to for answers, because we're all struggling with the same thing. So more than likely people will be coming to Charlotte saying, what are we doing as a pilot program? So that conversation will be continued and upon getting additional information from staff. But again, a lot of homework needs to be done. A lot of questions needs to be asked reference to how we move forward. And lastly, we had a very brief introduction to the small business strategy. Again, small business is one of those things in economic development that doesn't get a whole lot of fanfare because it's not big and fancy and sexy like workforce development, but it's the bread and butter of what we do, right? It's the blocking and tackling of economic development, outward mobility. And so they will be going through a year-long strategy, evaluation, outreach, looking at small businesses, those that's been defined for 50 employees or less, and we'll be bringing some more information back to the committee. But really, I think staff did a good job in terms of kicking this thing off for small business. There are a lot of interest at the committee level around small business and workforce development for certain. And we want to make sure that at the appropriate time, we invite Danielle to come and make a presentation before the committee, because there's a lot of questions around her activities, and we think it's time for her to say, hey, that does it.
It was a really good discussion in your committee meeting, and I think as it relates to the vacancies uptown, we left it on a positive note, saying this is a challenge, but of course it can be an opportunity for us to reimagine a part of our uptown and really lead in an effort that is something that's nationwide, that many of the large cities are facing. So, Ms. Ajmira, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Chairman Graham mentioned vacancy rates, and there are higher vacancy rates in University and Ballantyne. So are we looking at all the office buildings or just uptown office buildings?
That's a very good question. It's something that I also pointed out at the committee meeting, that we have vacancies city-wide.
That's right.
Obviously, today's topic was about uptown, because I think because of the demonstration project that Charlotte Center City Partners had produced, this competition, and so the focus of the conversation today was certainly on uptown. But obviously, when you look at the slide that we got today, and you saw the heat map for uptown, there are a lot of issues in uptown, but there's a lot of issues throughout the whole city as well. So that was acknowledged.
Okay. Now, I appreciate you recognizing that. So I think we need to be thoughtful and mindful as we come up with solutions to address office vacancy issues, because I see a slippery slope here. Are we going to provide the same sort of support to areas like University or East Charlotte or West Charlotte or Ballantyne? I don't think we need to cherry pick one over the other. I think all parts of our community deserves the same level of support as uptown. Other cities, I read an editorial in Washington Post over the weekend, and certainly this is not an issue unique to Charlotte. All cities across the nation are trying to struggle with, are struggling with this, San Francisco being one, and New York and others. And I read in that editorial where zoning plays a big part in that. Where cities are looking at zoning and how do they make the zoning process where really zoning is designed more for new development, but also for existing. How do we make how can we make the process more streamlined, where it doesn't take 6 months or a year, because time is of the essence, to address some of the conversion. While we recognize that not all buildings will qualify for conversion, because certainly there is plumbing and all that, but there are certain buildings that will be great for conversions. I think if we can look into that as part of the committee discussion, because I think that is something where it can make small investment, can make big impact, and that we can apply throughout the city. Tax increment grant, I don't know if I can support that. I struggle with that. Knowing what I know now, I haven't looked at the presentation, but just from the report, I'm not on board with tax increment grants. So I just want to go on record saying that. But I would be looking at other processes, city processes specifically, and how we can streamline that. And what else I wanted to add? Okay, I'll come back to that. I'll look at the presentation, but I might have follow-up questions. Thank you.
Well, I just want to make one comment. I think you're spot on your observation in reference to the scale and the scope of the issue throughout the city. And I think I acknowledge that. I'm almost certain this week I'll get a phone call from University City Partners, as well as the partnership in South Park in reference to some of the issues that they're having over there as well. And I left the committee meeting indicating to the group a couple of warnings, right? One, that we can't help everybody. Government is not the singular source to answering these questions. We can be a part of the solution, but certainly citywide, we can't be the solution. That's not attainable for a wide variety of reasons. And then secondly, it's also, when you look at the heat map that we saw in reference to uptown, and I wasn't at the first committee meeting, I was out of town, but I went back and reviewed the tape, and the thing that astonished me was in other cities where they're talking about buildings have to go, right? And so I think that we're going to have a really, really adult conversation in the community about this. And this is a scenario that's going to be with us for a while. These vacancy rates won't increase overnight. Councilmember Bukhari and I were thinking along the same thoughts about a more aggressive effort in reference to corporate recruitment for some of these vacancies uptown, which is, you know, everyone has, it's not a secret, everyone knows that's part of the strategy, right, throughout the country. And so we'll be competing with other cities, throwing incentives, trying to get folks to come here. But, you know, he made a number of good points in reference to how do we kind of make it sexy enough for these folks who want to come and outfit the buildings. So there's a number of things that we kind of threw out that we have to address, so we acknowledge that.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Driggs?
This is very interesting. For one, very creative work by Ms. Dodson and the people participating in the competition, responsive to the concern we have about the empty space, but it kind of opens up, you know, other topics, like we're creating housing, great. What kind of housing? Who gets to live there? And it's going to take a whole different value calculation compared to what we're used to, right? If we're talking about putting public money into this, what is it worth to us not to have an empty building? Or what kind of residence do we create? So it's going to take creativity on our part. I wanted to say also, and by the way, I think Mr. Bakari, you mentioned we should try to take this opportunity to do something that's sort of scalable, like create a model for this type of transaction. Would that be an accurate representation? And I agree with that. You know, we don't want to piecemeal this thing. We have a very large problem. It would be nice to get this deal done for what it's worth, but it may or may not be responsive to the larger problem. It may not be something that we can replicate. I did want to say about the TIG, I have reservations as well. To me, a TIG ideally is a case where some infrastructure that the city would pay for is being paid for by a developer, and we're paying them back by giving them the tax break, right? So in my mind, the question always is this something that is legitimately a city obligation, right? And it's basically a financing mechanism. So I agree that we should look critically at what is being funded by the TIG, but I think Ms. Dodson referred to the fact that we would be looking at, you know, the types of things that might be eligible for a TIG. You can't do just anything with a TIG. So I wouldn't personally take it off the table entirely, but I'm wondering if what we can do with a TIG and what is needed in order for this project to be realized align perfectly, and whether it then works its way back to a CIP or other ask. But that's it. I just think we need to wait and see. Very interesting, creative, and definitely worth following, as you said, to the next step.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Were you done? Do we have some? Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, question on the lines of a discussion of we, being government, were to step into this particular arena with noting that we cannot pick certain locations and not others. Before we even entertain a real conversation, it would be helpful to know what due diligence and clawbacks do we have in place for each of those buildings. What have you done to secure space? Have you reduced your rent? Have you thought about diversifying who's coming into that space? Because we're having simultaneous conversations. We're having conversations with small businesses not being able to afford to get access to space. We're having conversations in our arts community with them not being able to afford access to office or meeting space. So there are some things that can be done that may not necessarily agree with whatever financial bottom line they're looking at, that needs to be exhausted prior to coming to government and asking government to step in. Because at the end of the day, we have conversations about the cost of doing business. If the cost of doing business are certain things, then in certain steps that must be taken before there should be any conversation, or, because you have authority up to 500,000 to do certain things, before anything comes to your desk asking for any money, it needs to be very clear that they've exhausted the avenues that are already out there, because that very well could achieve multiple goals for those small businesses, for our arts community, and for them to have revenue coming in before any tax dollars come to the table.
Okay, no additional questions. We're going to move on to Ms. Ajmira for the Budget, Governance, and Intergovernmental Committee.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So first, let me recognize committee members, Vice Chair Mr. Bukhari, committee members, Councilmember Mayfield, Councilmember Brown, and Councilmember Mitchell. We had 3 items on our agenda. We had federal and state legislative agenda. Second item we had was the budget development schedule. And last we had just went over performance objectives that I don't think I need to rehash those because those were discussed at the retreat. But I will go in depth on those first 2 items. So thank you, Ms. Birch, for passing out federal and state legislative agenda. If you can all just take a look at that quickly and see if you have any questions, concerns. But in a nutshell, there shouldn't be any surprises. Pretty much what we have been discussing around mobility, aviation, upward mobility, digital inclusion, immigration, and public safety, environment, housing, all of those issues have been included in our federal and state legislative agenda. As you can see, you will see under mobility that we have a specific focus on building out of the strategic mobility plan. I know that that was one of our key priorities out of our retreat, so I just wanted to emphasize that. So in addition to those that's already been in front of you, there are other items that we did discuss. So first item we discussed was Powell bill, but we decided to not include that because mobility plan discussion would cover that. So we decided not to pursue that. We were not successful in previous years in restoring Powell bill. And our Mr. Dana Fenton, he's not in the room? Okay. Well, he suggested that it would be an uphill battle, so we decided to not include that on our legislative agenda. Second, we discussed state funding in depth about Project Breakpoint. So as many of you remember, we were able to secure $20 million in budget allocation from General Assembly last year for our Chinese facility. And committee discussed how we could potentially use those funds to further our tourism goals and recruit additional tourism assets, or to use those funds for maintaining our existing tourism assets. We were told by Mr. Fenton that that funding has already been reallocated behind the doors. So that was certainly a surprise to some of us at the committee level. We did not know that budget reallocation had already happened before even the public discussions have started. And last, we discussed CMPD's support. I know police chief have advocated for additional funding for the DA's office, for our courts, for juvenile support. We are waiting on our Housing and Safety Committee's recommendations, but we do have a deadline here for our state legislative agenda, which is April, before they go into a session. So we'll try to work around that timeline with our Housing and Safety Committee Chairwoman, Dr. Watlington, to add those items.
Excuse me.
So that's all on state legislative agenda. On federal, really, there were no changes other than we appreciate all that's being done. We certainly also highlighted the fact where we need to acknowledge Senator Tom Tillis's efforts to further our immigration reform. So stay on the lookout for a thank you note that will be going to this Senator Tillis's office. I know Dana is working on that with Mayor's office. And I also asked about R&D credit. I know that's something Business Alliance has been advocating for. We'll get more information on that and we'll decide whether to add that or not. But as you can see from our next steps here, we do have a timeline here. So this will be in front of us end of February to adopt state and federal legislative agenda. So any questions or concerns on this? Okay, silence means we are good. Okay. And just the budget development schedule, if you can take a look at that. So next Monday, we have 3 hours budget workshop, our first budget workshop. Traditionally, we had spent 5 hours. We are going to try to do this in 3 hours. So let's see if we can, if we are successful with addressing 4 items on our budget schedule for next Monday. But we will get, at our next budget workshop, which is on Monday, we will get, we'll talk about the general fund, staffing and compensation, existing capital projects, and capital capacity. And committees decided that the committee will talk about enterprise funds such as aviation, water, and stormwater, unless a full council would like to dig deeper. That will not be part of our budget workshops. However, out of enterprise funds, we will have CATS as part of our budget workshops, because I'm sure some of us, especially transportation committee members, might want to dig deeper into CATS budget. But also I want to highlight great work that our budget staff is doing. We had our Budget 101 last week, which I had an opportunity to attend, and we had over 75 people. We had room packed, and I've never seen room packed for a budget discussion. So it was certainly a great way to start our kick off our budget process. So for those of you that are watching online, please go online. We have Budget Simulator. Provide us your feedback and how you will balance $3 billion budget, what projects that you'd like us to prioritize. But certainly it's a great tool. Certainly takes a lot of time. Once you're into it, you can spend like 6-8 hours and still not balance the budget. But it's a great way to provide feedback. So there are, I think, 3 more virtual engagement sessions, and there is 1 in person. That's at Eastway Rec Center. So please attend those if you can. I had a great time just hearing from community on what should be our priorities. But that's all on the budget. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. We're going to move on to the Housing and Safety Committee with Ms. Watlington.
Thank you. We had 2 items today. Much like every other committee, we discussed our performance metrics. But in particular, we want to deep dive on the ordinances today. So in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask ACM Heath to come up and share that with us. The second topic that we covered today was in regards to our framework around youth violence, and staff laid out for us outcomes, or not outcomes, but next steps based on the conversations that we had at the strategy session last week. So over the course of the next couple of months, we are going to be deep diving that, partnering externally as well, and we expect that staff will come back with recommendations to our programs and policies to try to ramp up our efforts around youth violence. That's the main things from today. More to come in regards to that. One thing we did highlight is that that needs to be in partnership with a timeline that will support our legislative agenda. So as things come out that are not already captured here, that we can go ahead and get those in the pipeline. So yes, we will look out for more from that. And then today, what we'd like to share with you is the current status of the Code of Ordinances recommendations that came out of committee last month. There have been a couple of changes since the committee met, so we'll cover that with you as well. But we are looking to answer any questions that you have today so that we can hopefully move toward taking council action in the coming weeks.
Yeah, yeah. So
Now I will
Sean,
ask
as you come up, we are, unless anyone has any questions for Ms. Watlington and her committee, we are closing out the committee discussion. And then, just as a reminder, a few weeks back, the mayor asked myself and Mr. Bakari to work together to come up with some ideas around how we can better utilize this first Monday of the month meeting. So it's an opportunity to have a more expansive conversation on a variety of priority issues and topics that we, the council, have bubbled up through our prep for the retreat and in other conversations. And so tonight, we are going to jumpstart this new effort of utilizing Monday evenings with the review of this Code of Ordinances and what the chief has put forth and some modifications. Hopefully everyone has received the updated memo from the chief in their packet last Thursday, which highlights the updates there. And before I turn it over to Sean, Mr. Bakari, did you want to make any comments about just the use of this time?
Yeah, I
on a
mean,
go-forward
I think
basis?
the way I level set it is in the theoretical new model, right? At a mature state, which we're not at yet, but hopefully we can get towards, there will be committee meetings, offline work with council, offline work with staff, and the general work of marching towards long-term goals that are defined should take the form of the high-level, 6-block dashboards and the metrics and the things that have a waterfall of management underneath them. But then how do we use our time? And while we are certainly not there yet, this is a great example of how, okay, our time is best used coming into where there is a blank spot as it relates to the policy that's there for one reason or another, as you can tell here. And I think the mission is a lot of work through committees, and some points through ad hoc committees, through whatever, staff. A lot of work goes into before this moment. So it's presented in a way that a lot of the questions have been answered. But this isn't about presenting the answer. This is about presenting, here's all the perspective, all the views, everything the chief and his organization wants, everything all of you want, and how can you hash it out where you listen to the others with an open mind and try to find a win-win scenario where you march towards an 11-0 vote versus a 6-5 vote. So if I was to just kind of articulate the overall mission statement of using this time now, as a lot of work went into it, this is not about saying, oh, I've got my thing already in mind. It's keeping an open ear, both an open mouth to what you want, but an open ear to what everyone else wants to see if there's a path to an 11-0. That's really how I describe the objective.
Well stated. City Manager, did you have any comments?
I just didn't know if you guys saw the look on Sean's face when his backup came in. He had this big smile. They weren't going to leave you out there, man. There have been a lot of discussions over the years about not just having this as a report out of what happened during the day, but really being able to move the needle. So we appreciate that. A couple of things that I would just say that's on the horizon coming from the retreat. One of the items that you talked about maybe in the space is this concept of regional discussions, partnerships with the county, the school board, things of that nature. And mobility also came up on the whiteboard or the parking lot as an opportunity to have a discussion in the space. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, Sean, we're going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So the presentation is brief by design, just 5 slides. I will be the spokesperson, so to speak. I am very pleased to have the team here. So Jessica Battle from the City Attorney's Office and Deputy Chief Robinson with CMPD. This has been a group effort over the last few months to advance this work. And What we'll do is a quick background on the referral itself, then we'll highlight the 6 specific ordinances that were reflected in Chief Jennings' memo from Thursday of last week. I'll close out with some highlights related to the non-enforcement strategies that we're advancing in parallel to this enforcement recommendation. Background for the referral. So you may recall that Mayor Lyles released a referral for a review of the City Code of Ordinances to the Housing, Safety, and Community Committee in August of 23. I will read here brief as quickly as I can the key policy questions reflected in the referral. What effective strategies can the city employ in collaboration with partners to holistically address perceived safety concerns in Center City and surrounding areas? What are community concerns and feedback related to our unhoused population? Are there revisions to the City Code of Ordinances to restore criminal enforcement penalties that should be considered to better help our neighborhoods and businesses across the city to thrive? So this referral was discussed in committee twice, first in October of last year, and then most recently in January. If I could quickly highlight some of the key components from the January committee discussion. First was an acknowledgement that if you go back in time, it was not the city of Charlotte that decriminalized the ordinances. This was really driven by a state action, Session Law 2021-138, commonly referred to as SB 300, which was a 29-page criminal justice reform bill that had many features, one of which was it decriminalized most ordinance offenses at the local level. When that went into effect, city staff embarked on a multi-month process under the direction of council to evaluate ordinances that may have been suitable for reinforcement of or reestablishment of the criminal penalty option, culminating in council's decisions in the March and April of 2022 timeframe to reestablish criminal penalties for about a dozen ordinances at that time. So that was a point in time assessment that was done and council approval on those particular ordinances. So fast forward into 2023 and some of the concerns bubbling in the community that were the genesis for the referral itself being introduced in late August. One of the requirements of the referral was to have a public listening session, which we did in late September. There were about 100 members of the community that participated. There were a few council members in attendance, and there were really 3 key themes from that public listening session. One, a general perception that quality of life and public safety has deteriorated in the Center City. 2, support for restoration of criminal penalties on these quality of life related ordinances. And 3, a recognition that enforcement alone would not be sufficient to solve the underlying issues. I would like to underscore that while this was a public session that was marketed in advance through various channels, it just so happened the attendance that evening skewed very heavily towards the uptown housed population. Number of folks in the community that deserve to have their voice heard as they did that evening. But I just want to acknowledge to the community advocates, some of which I know are concerned about this particular conversation, who we had in the room that night and who we didn't. Finally, on December 5th, Chief Jennings released a memo to City Council, which identified 8 specific ordinances that were recommended for the restoration of the criminal penalty. And then the Housing Safety Community Committee passed a motion at the January committee meeting, which you can see here, to move this conversation forward to full council discussion this evening. Here are the 6 ordinances that were reflected in the memo from Chief Jennings last week. And these are the titles of the ordinances. I know some or many of these may seem to speak for themselves, but this is a thing where details matter. And I'm not going to read every word of every ordinances, but most of these ordinances are fairly short. And I think it's important as council is considering this to have a really firm grasp around what are the specific behaviors and activities that are prohibited under these ordinances. So I'm going to go through each one of these very quickly. 15-3, beer and wine consumption, possession of open container disposal, prohibits consumption or open container on public streets, sidewalks, or rapid transit centers. Also unlawful to consume on private business premises without permission. 15-8, trespassing on motor vehicles, unlawful to enter another person's vehicle by force or threatened use of force, or to remain in a vehicle after having been requested to leave by the owner. 15-82, masturbation in public, unlawful to willfully masturbate in any public place in the presence of another person. 15-83, urination and defecation on certain public property prohibited. unlawful to urinate or defecate on any public place, sidewalk, street, right-of-way, or any private property without the permission of the owner. 15-136, behavior, more specifically in city parks. And there are a handful of specific prohibited actions reflected in this particular ordinance. And they are consumption, possession of alcohol, drugs, burning flammable material or building a fire, entering an area posted as closed to the public, lie or sleep in a prone position on seats, tables, or benches, and disturb or interfere with the activities of another person with an intent to disrupt. As an aside, I would mention that Mecklenburg County has their own ordinance which governs Mecklenburg County-owned parks within the city of Charlotte, and they have many of these same features built into their ordinance, which, by the way, had criminal penalties restored in late 2021. And finally, 14-282, soliciting from street or median strip. This is the only one of the 6 ordinances where the substantive language of the ordinance itself is recommended to have fairly significant modifications in order to ensure that the language is constitutionally sound. And this is an item that in a moment I'll ask Jessica Battle to comment on. In the revised version of the ordinance that's being recommended, the essence of it is that it would be unlawful to stand, sit, lie down, or loiter in a roadway or median strip for any purpose other than to cross the road. And this would exclude sidewalks, of course. So if I could, Jessica, is there anything related to the case law review that you would comment on that informed this recommendation for the ordinance on the list of 6? And then some ordinances that were considered but are not on the recommended list anymore because of some concerns around the First Amendment.
Yes, absolutely. Good evening. Jessica Battle from the City Attorney's Office. I'm first addressing 14-282, soliciting, formerly, or currently, I should say, soliciting from the street or median. This matter has a lot of First Amendment issues, and I can tell you that the research on amending this ordinance dates back to 2017. There was a case out of the Federal Fourth Circuit of the United States in which North Carolina is a part of. The case is called Clatterbuck versus City of Charlottesville in Virginia. And in that case, there were issues with their panhandling ordinance, and the Fourth Circuit was clear that persons have a First Amendment right to solicit funds in the same way that people have a First Amendment right to protest religious standpoints, points on abortion, those sorts of things. And likewise, people have a First Amendment right to respond and give contributions to those who might be soliciting. And with that, we tried several times to update this particular ordinance. Since 2017, many of the federal circuits across the United States have struck down panhandling and soliciting ordinances in various municipalities in the country due to those First Amendment concerns. And so the solution here was to eliminate all forms of mentioning panhandling, soliciting alms, begging, because you have to criminalize the behavior and not the speech being the asking for funds. And so we tried to do that. Please excuse me. We tried to make sure we did that and took away all of those references and made the ordinance proposal that there's no standing, sitting, lying, or loitering in the median strips. We believe that were this ordinance to be challenged on a First Amendment basis, the city could adequately defend that because there is a legitimate safety, public safety concern in having people in medians causing traffic accidents, being hit themselves. We are all aware of traffic fatalities that occur in Charlotte, especially in our major thoroughfares. And so to avoid First Amendment issues, while we truly understand the needs and concerns of our community members, the chief has also chosen to recommend what he thinks would be in the best interest of the city in terms of liability and in terms of our officers taking action over unconstitutional ordinances. We want to make sure that we are following the case law as currently written. As we move now to the other 2 ordinances that were previously recommended by the chief's initial memo and then unrecommended by his memo last week, the first being 15-7, unauthorized persons on parking lots, and 15-5, public solicitation and begging regulated, and 15-23, loitering for the purpose of drug activity. Similarly, it might be a surprise to some that there are First Amendment issues in those matters as well. People have a right to walk freely freely in public vehicular areas or parking lots, as we would call them. As it relates to unauthorized people in parking lots, we believe that it would be hard to define in an ordinance what is lawful business of being in a parking lot. The person who paid to park, that could be a lawful person, but if they have people who are riding with them, if I'm tailgating and I didn't pay for the parking spot, but 100 of us show up to tailgate, it could be hard for a citizen to determine what is lawful versus unlawful behavior, and that brings up the constitutional issue of vagueness, that a person would not know whether their behavior was criminal or not, and that's why at this time the chief has removed that from his recommended ordinances. Last, I will reference 15-23, loitering for the purpose of engaging in drug activity. There was a case in 2010 out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, State versus Mello. In that particular case, the North Carolina Court of Appeals struck down the city of Winston-Salem's loitering for drug activity ordinance for the same reason, saying that it's unconstitutional to criminalize what would otherwise be lawful behavior, standing in a certain area, being associated with people who may have a criminal past as it relates to controlled substances. And with that being said, we did not believe that there was a way to lawfully amend this ordinance so that it would comply with the Constitution, and therefore that's also been removed from consideration. It's important to note that a lot of the behavior that is not recommended for recriminalization can be addressed by state statutes. As far as panhandling, if someone touches a person, they could be charged with assault. If they cause a scene, we have disorderly conduct or communicating threats. And depending on the manner in which the person seeks funds, it could rise to the level of a common law robbery if there were to be threats of violence in order to get money. As we talk about loitering for drug activity, people who commit certain hand-to-hand transactions are in high drug areas. Officers can use those in the totality of circumstances in order to form reasonable suspicion to investigate those people and then arrest them if probable cause is determined. And I'd be glad to answer any other additional questions that any members of council may have at this time in relation to our ordinance proposals on behalf of CMPD.
And I have 2 more slides here, so it's up. Okay, it's okay
Yes.
to continue? Okay, I'll move quickly. Thank you, Jessica. In terms of the guiding principles that inform the recommendation, 3 very quickly here. First, and this is kind of a foundational principle consistent with the memo from the chief last week, that these were really selected based on a consideration of which ordinances warrant an additional enforcement tool in order to enhance CMPD's ability to maintain public safety. Number 2, this is a really key point and something that Deputy Chief Robinson commented on extensively at the recent committee meetings is even if council were to reach the decision to establish criminal penalties for these ordinances, officers still maintain discretion based on the circumstances of what's happening in the moment. And there's typically an opportunity to seek voluntary compliance, maybe a verbal warning is appropriate, maybe a civil citation, and the enforcement option of last resort is an arrest. So there would be nothing about restoring these penalties that would require CMPD in all instances to jump straight to the enforcement of a criminal penalty. It's something where they have discretion in the moment. So on the last one here, once again, just an acknowledgement from the public listening session and from the advocacy community and from city staff, frankly, as well, is that holistic non-enforcement strategies are necessary in order to address the underlying root cause challenges associated with homelessness. We get that. On the next slide, I'm going to dive into, kind of zoom in pretty tight here on a few specific things that we're considering in tandem with this enforcement recommendation. But before I do that, if you would allow me, I would like to take a moment to zoom out for a second, just to underscore a number of things the City of Charlotte has done in the last 3 to 5 years to demonstrate a very strong commitment to housing and homelessness challenges in our community. First, with the Housing Trust Fund, since the increase of the Housing Trust Fund from a $15 million to a $50 million bond in 2018, we've committed roughly $150 million in support of the creation or preservation of over 6,000 affordable units. Of those over 6,000 units, 25% of those are devoted to 30% AMI households and below. Since 2021, the City of Charlotte has committed close to $50 million of American Rescue Plan stimulus funding in support of a range of housing and homelessness-related programming, including housing support grants to organizations like Freedom Fighting Missionaries, West Boulevard Land Trust, Heal Charlotte. We co-invested in a strategy for Brook Hill Apartments with Mecklenburg County in order to avoid the displacement of the residents at Brook Hill and preserve affordability through the year 2049. We've invested in the expansion of the Charlotte Rescue Mission. So those are examples of how we've put the $50 million of ARPA that Council chose to devote to housing and homelessness to work. Since 2020, we've deployed over $60 million of federal stimulus funds for emergency rental assistance to support those households in the greatest need that required emergency support to maintain their house. We supported over 23,000 families through that particular program. As you know, we leverage our annual federal allocations from HUD, CDBG, ESG, HOPWA funding, and since the year 2020, we've committed roughly $30 million in support of a range of tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, case management, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, City Council has made a number of very intentional policy choices over the last few years in support of this segment of the population, including the requirement that new multifamily construction or NOAA investments by the City of Charlotte will have a requirement that 20% of those units be devoted to 30% AMI and below. The fairly recent decision by City Council to establish a source of income protection policy for city-supported housing. So as I mention all of those things, I'm in no way trying to diminish the magnitude of the challenges that we're facing as a community as it relates to housing and homelessness, just simply trying to underscore that I believe this city, this council and previous councils have continued to lean very heavily into these issues. In terms of the zooming in on a few specific items, non-enforcement related, in tandem with these recommendations, I'll go through these fairly quickly. Current activity, we believe, and I believe in the advocacy community has been calling for this as well, that additional street outreach is necessary in the City of Charlotte. So with street outreach, think of bringing the social services to the unhoused population, building a rapport with those individuals, providing casework, system navigation, referrals to these individuals on a dedicated basis. So we're working with Hearts for the Invisible, which is a local nonprofit organization. We're building on an investment that Mecklenburg County has made in Hearts for the Invisible to have a dedicated street outreach team devoted primarily to the center city. So we don't have the contract across the goal line quite yet, but we're getting close. And we're excited to see that street outreach up and running. That will be done in complement with the CARES team. It's not redundant with what we have in place. They will complement one another. Number two, every year we have some federal funds that we use for tenant-based rental assistance. This is a very important funding opportunity as it relates to addressing individuals that were formerly homeless or chronically homeless. So we're in the process of getting our current year contracts in place with a handful of agencies for the tenant-based rental assistance, i.e. the rental subsidies. And what we're going to do this year is we're going to have an intentional carve-out for 10 clients that are referred specifically from the center city in order to have a little bit more connective tissue between some of the things we're doing on street outreach and some of the things that we're doing with rental subsidies and supportive services, recognizing that broadly speaking, of course, we're trying to address housing and homelessness challenges across the city and the full county, but there's clearly a great need in the center city itself. Increasing public restroom access in the center city. There's a need for that. There are a number of things that we're doing in collaboration with Mecklenburg County, and I'll start from the smallest and move my way up. So first, there's a nonprofit in the city of Charlotte called Hope Vibes, and among other things, they have a mobile truck. It's about the size of a large U-Haul truck, and in that truck they have 2 full bathrooms, including 2 toilets, 2 showers, 2 sinks, and they have 3 washers and 3 dryers. So this is a really big truck, and they rotate this service around. It's on wheels, and that particular asset is in need of a major refurb and repair project. So the city and county, in partnership, are going to get the Hope Tank back on the road. I would set expectations a little bit. There are clearly limitations in how many places they can visit during any given week, but they've agreed that they will certainly focus on the center city as one of their target areas. So that's the first thing. Second, in collaboration with the county, we're going to have a couple porta-johns set up around North College and 11th Street, pretty close to the county's homeless resource center. The county has agreed, to have the porta-johns placed on their property, so we're taking care of the contracting. We will fund that for up to 6 months. I'm also working with our general services team to identify another area in the city that's suitable for porta-johns. And third, I've mentioned the Portland Loo before. It's a company based out of Portland, Oregon. They have a design single-stall restroom that was designed specifically to address challenges associated with the unhoused population in terms of arson and vandalism, et cetera. So we're at a point from a city staff perspective that we're ready to move forward with that particular opportunity. But we're working with the county and giving them some time to do some due diligence, because I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but what I'd love to do is have the city buy 2 Portland Loos, and the county is doing an evaluation. I'd love to see if the county could possibly, I can't commit anything for them today, allow us to have those Portland Loos placed on county property, and that they would operate and maintain those over the life of the assets. So we're leaning into that as fast as we can, and just received a current quote from the company last week. In terms of planned activity, I would just remind you once again, we've been talking about a home for all for a couple years. This is the community framework focused on housing and homelessness, working very closely with Mecklenburg County on this. The United Way was selected as the quarterback agency. Fiscal year 2025 is a big year where this effort starts to ramp up. The county is evaluating a $14 million funding ask to support the activation of a home for all work. The city is evaluating a roughly $12 million funding ask. And as has always been the vision, the United Way is embarking on a private sector fundraising strategy for this work as well. So this is very much intended to be a collaborative effort. In terms of the types of things that fall under the Home for All umbrella, some of what we're looking at in that $12 million investment would be prevention measures that you're familiar with. We've talked before about the idea of legal aid to have eviction prevention in the community. We've talked about property provider recruitment and retention, which is just a long word to say how can we encourage and incent property providers to allow individuals with vouchers in the community to have access to housing. And moving down to the bottom item here on the list, this is really a concept at this point, but it's been based on a lot of conversations across the local ecosystem in this space, not just the city and the county, but the idea here would be to have a roughly 75-bed non-congregate shelter that would really create a low barrier opportunity for the unhoused population. It wouldn't be devoted to individuals just from the center city. But once again, ultimately, I believe what we're trying to build towards is you think of a continuum in your mind where you have street outreach and engagement, you have supportive services, tenant-based rental assistance, providing some short-term subsidized housing options, permanent supportive housing. This would be an emergency shelter. And one of the things that we believe would be necessary, would be quite helpful, is if this had some hardwired support services built into the facility itself, focused on individuals with severe mental illness and substance use issues. So we're really trying to build out an integrated model here. As I'm talking about it, it can sound like a bunch of one-offs, but that's the ultimate vision. So I wanted to give you a sense for some of the things that we're doing today or actively exploring that we believe are kind of developing that degree of humanity into the strategy. In terms of next steps, council discussion Q&A this evening with the possibility of having the vote on February 12th, where there would, of course, be an opportunity for public comment. So that's the end of the prepared presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sean and Ms. Battle. Just evidence of all of the work that has been done in preparation for us to have this discussion tonight. And I also appreciate you, Sean, highlighting how much we've done as a city to focus on helping and addressing the challenges of the unhoused population and the underhoused population. So we have several council members who would like to speak to this topic. What I'd like to do is we'll just go around the table, and we'll start with Ms. Brown. And if you have any questions for Sean, or if you want to make any comments, that's your opportunity to do so. So, Ms. Brown.
Can I hold it when you talk? Oh, let it turn green. So thank you, Madam Pro Tem, Mayor Pro Tem Dante Anderson. So yes, John, thank you for all of the information that you provided. The presentation was very nice. I like the idea of some of the things that's going to be done in downtown Charlotte. I still hold true to how I feel about recriminalization. That's not going to change for me. I stand firm on that with a lot of grassroots organizations and community individuals that feel strong about this topic that we're discussing, very, very sensitive to me as well. You fight for what you fight for, you believe in what you believe in, and that's the person that I am. I realize that I am with a group of individuals, and we sometimes have to dig real deep and try to figure out what we're going to do to make things work. The discretion piece is what I have a problem with. And I know when I spoke out on this before, I got an email from the FOP, and I responded to them. I didn't appreciate that email at all, coming to attack me on how I feel. It's my right to address my concerns as a council member. That was put in this seat by the constituents and the constituents only. And so I was very upset over that. And I wanted to address that, and it's the perfect time to do so. I also feel like that City Center is a focus point for the city of Charlotte, that we are kind of catering to them, and that's not fair, because the city of Charlotte has a wide variety of other areas that need to be addressed in the same manner, in the same focus. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be willing to work with the committee, but we're going to have to circle back on some things for me. I know it's moving into discussion. I know that it's a heated topic in the community. A lot of people will be coming in and have signed up to speak on this topic. I just want to share something real fast, and I don't want to be really long-winded, but I want to, be crystal clear on how I feel and what my point is on this. When we say at the discretion, I'm not saying that all officers are going to be willing to just arrest people, but I know sometimes when you give pushback to some other officers, for instance, just like we had that incident at Bojangles on the corner of Airwood and South Tryon Street, the officers used that discretion that day as well, and we saw what happened. So I want to be crystal clear when I say that I'm not going to just sign up and go along just to get along on the ordinance recommended for recriminalization. For one, and I wanted to be clearly stated and put on record that I was then disagreeing with the committee, myself and Councilwoman Johnson. So I want to be clear and make sure that Brown is on the record for not agreeing with the committee. And so nowhere in downtown Charlotte, I went around myself, didn't broadcast it. You can't use the restroom anywhere downtown unless you are a client or you're in a restaurant. But if you're just strolling down the street and you want to use the restroom, that's not going to happen. So it sounds good, and I know how long it's taken for me to rebuild my life and fighting for the individuals that come from where I come from. It takes a very, very long time for plans like this. They don't just change overnight. You can put your slides together, put your documents together, state what sounds good on record, but when you actually put it out there, does it really work? And I'm just going to use myself for an example. Coming home and having to check the box, trying to get a job. You know how long it took for us to have to ban the box so someone can get a job? But still to this day, you still got to check the box to get somewhere to stay. So we really need to look into what we can do. There are grassroots organizations that you have and that you've mentioned, but you also said something that bothered me as well, that when you had the meeting, that it was catered to Uptown Charlotte, but that's not the only people that go in Uptown and Downtown. The entire city use Uptown and Downtown Charlotte. So just because you're not a resident in that area doesn't mean that you can't affluent the area to use it for the facilities and the things that you need to do. So that's going to be my position on it, and I'm going to stand firm with that. It's a no for me.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Sean, did you want to clarify the attendance of the public forum meeting?
Yeah, well, I think really, I just wanted to acknowledge when I was providing the key themes, which were the key themes, I didn't want the community to interpret my remarks to suggest that it was a fully representative sample of the community views on this issue. It was a public session. It was open to anyone. It was marketed as open to anyone. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Ms. Molina?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Wow, Councilmember Brown, you're hard to come behind, girl. And I don't disagree with her points. I think the one strength in having a body is that we're going to have
all of these full perspectives come. So I don't want to belabor any points that, Councilmember Brown brought up, but I will just add my portion of my initial thoughts around the ordinances and some of the concerns that have been raised to me as a result of interacting with the community members. I got a call in particular on Friday from a very engaged Uptown resident. And for the record, I was actually at that meeting that Mr. Heath is referencing, and a lot of the participation was from, so I guess I'll preface it with a lot of the participation were from Uptown residents that are actually living in Uptown, and how they are in particular being affected by some of the issues that we're looking to create the ordinance to try to control. That, in addition to what we had happen during the New Year's celebration, has caused some particular concerns where it comes to, not only our Uptown residents, but our community as a whole with reference to public safety and things like that. So I think it actually, inevitably drew some additional attention to our Uptown and the emphasis around creating, control with, not only people who live there, but people who visit there as well. So I just, not to belabor that point, but to come back to the call that I received. I spoke to a resident who I simply adore. Her name is Judy Selden Cohen, and she is very active, very involved across our community. And although she didn't give me anything in particular that she agreed or disagreed with, she had a concern around the unhoused population and how, if this actually is something that we adopt, where are we in coordination with the, I guess, the resources that would involve the county? And let's say, for an example, if this was adopted by the council, hypothetically, and we needed to connect someone to resources, where are we in that portion of I guess, the exchange that would need to take place? Do you have any, and there's no pressure to answer that today, but is that something that if this were to happen on, the 12th, for an example, for the unhoused population, are those resources in place, or is that something that we'd have to kind of deal with as we go? Do we know that?
Yes, I think this would, if the ordinances were restored for criminal penalties, then if to the extent there are homeless individuals that are trying to access the system, nothing would change in that, right? That as a county, as a city, we have the coordinated entry process, which is the way that anybody in the community that's looking to access resources and programming that they may be in need of due to their housing situation or lack thereof, that's how it would start. That would be unchanged.
Okay, because I think the only thing that I would add, and I know that we have like an intergovernmental connection, but I think now that we are considering this for adoption, I think inevitably we're going to have to, have kind of a continued touch point with our county counterparts so that, we have some level of agreement with the resources that they have access to as opposed to what we have access to, and see how we can widen that for, the humanity in this, right? I think everyone in this room agrees with, and there's no points missing on, the need for humanity as we continue to work towards, policies that will protect our residents. And so, understanding that this is a continued work in progress, I don't want to belabor any additional points, but that was only my initial thoughts around it. So I'll just, listen for the rest of the council and anything. That's all I have, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So to Councilmember Molina's point just now, the county manager, myself, Anthony Trotman, as well as Sean Heath and United Way have been committed to have conversations just like what you've asked, to how can we make sure that we can be, I guess, more seamless in our operations. And some of what Sean has presented tonight is a result of those initial conversations with the county and the United Way.
Excellent. And I just want to also say, Sean, Attorney's Office, thank you for your work on this. I know this is difficult. We are balancing something so very delicate for our community, right? So I appreciate your work. Good to see your Deputy Chief Rumson. Great to see you. Thank you, Ms. Molina. Ms. Ashmira.
Thank you. Mr. Heath, great job. So much progress since we last received an update on this. Great to see. This is not an either or. It's not enforcement or support. It's not mutually exclusive. We are doing all of it. We are working on addressing homelessness. We are addressing affordable housing crisis. We are addressing access to public restrooms. We are investing more money into support services. So this is a truly comprehensive plan to address supportive services, wraparound services, as well as enforcement. And I have shared this at the committee meeting. This is not just about public safety, but this is about public health issue, because we got to make sure that we are keeping all our residents, our visitors, our unhoused and housed population in safe and sanitary condition. No one should have to live in unsanitary condition, regardless of where they go in our city. I would like to understand I need clarification on a couple of items. Number one, this is going to be coming in front of the full council in February. When does it go in effect?
So the last time council went through this process, the ordinances that had the criminal penalty restored, it was effective as of the date of adoption. I would defer to Jessica if there's any discretion for council to consider another approach.
I would second that it was the date of the vote that they went into effect.
So I would like to suggest that we have an effective date of March 1st. It would be a more humane, response, because this will give our nonprofits, our partners, an opportunity to get the message out about access to public restrooms, where they are located, and getting that information is absolutely critical to ensure that we are having a humane response to our unhoused population. Also, Mr. Heath, you highlighted this, that law enforcement alone cannot address this on their own. This is really a community problem that requires community solution. With that, I would like us to look into our mental health support. I know CMPD has a team that goes out there, but they are not available on weekends from what I understand. I would like to see if there is a possibility to expand our mental health support. I don't think officers should be serving as mental health counselors. They already have a lot in their plate. So if we can figure out a way to expand our mental health support as part of this comprehensive strategy, that adds to our humane response.
Councilmember Ezra, may I just ask one follow-up? Are you referring specifically to the CARES team?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Do you know the hours? From what I understood, they were not available on weekends. Is that correct?
Last that I heard, it was Monday to Friday from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And in terms of the geographic scope, when it was first rolled out in late 2022, it focused on the Central Division. That was expanded to include Metro in the middle of calendar year 23.
So I would like us to see if we can expand the hours. If we can expand the hours on weekends, that would be helpful. I know Robert Dawkins and others at the grassroots level have advocated for this, and I think that's a fair request. It will add to our more humane response to our unhoused population or anyone who is struggling with mental health illness. And I certainly appreciate how Mr. Jones looks at everything with sort of assessment, right? We have, how do we assess whether our ordinances that we are recommending today is doing what we intended it to do? So if we can have some sort of assessment after it goes in effect, let's say 12 months, 18 months down the road, does it really doing what it was intended to do? So I think having that in place would be helpful, Mr. Jones. but I certainly appreciate the work the committee has done. Councilmember, Chairwoman Dr. Watlington, Vice Chair, Councilmember Mayfield. I think you have come a long way from where we were. I just appreciate that we have a partnership with the county. And county is really, along with the city, is investing into addressing the root cause of the issue, and that is absolutely critical in addressing this problem holistically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Sean, I feel like we have made a lot of good traction on what's before us this evening and the thought processes and research behind it. And as I've said before, this is a multifaceted issue. It's not just an unhoused issue. It's not just a behavioral issue. It's a multifaceted issue. And of many things that we're thinking about approaching this, it is an issue that is impacting our residents uptown. They live and breathe this area every single day, morning, noon, and night. And I was able to be at the listening session as well, along with Ms. Councilmember Molina and Councilmember Graham. And Councilmember Graham and I share uptown. We split uptown from our representation. And so I feel really good about the holistic approach, specifically the non-enforcement strategies that are multi-pronged that we are standing up to address the root cause of the challenge. But I would also say that there is a broader impact of inaction as well, and we have to balance the two. So the work that the CARES team is doing and the new Hearts for the Invisible, how we're engaging them, I think will help tremendously from quarterbacking our residents to the right resources. So I think that those things are all very good. A question I had, Sean, you mentioned the opportunity to bring on porta potties in one, if not two areas proximate to uptown. What would be the timeline for those porta potty units to come online?
So we'll have the two porta-johns located at North College and 11th online next week. And then, as I mentioned, I'm working with General Services to try to identify one more location. I've had some conversations with CMPD and some local nonprofit organizations to get feedback on how many porta-johns might be necessary, where should we consider putting them. Next week doesn't have to be the start and the end of this, but we wanted to make sure we had something that was guaranteed to be online potentially during the same week when council is taking a vote on this.
That's excellent. And, you know, as I had thought you had done, you know, our community partners have been at the table with us from the beginning. So I don't think a vote in any way, shape, or form would surprise them, because we've been working with them. Staff has been working with them. The committee members and leaders have been working with them. So I believe if and when these do come back online, I think we have worked very closely with the community partners to make sure that they're ready. I also think a lot of the things that you mentioned about the porta potties, for example, and the Hearts for the Invisible and other aspects, I'm wondering the effort we need to do to ensure from an outreach perspective that that information is shared, right? So we have our community partners at the table, but to the extent that we can share that from a grassroots outreach perspective about these changes and what potentially might come, I think that would be very helpful. So I've heard from many, many residents from uptown, but across the city. I think the residents have a very humane approach to this, but they also recognize that, in particular, uptown Charlotte is a pulse, is a generator And it really is the face of the city for many visitors who come from the region and outside. And so we need to ensure the safety, public safety of the residents and everyone who frequents Uptown. Thank you. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Could you pull up the last slide where we talk about the, no, the other one, all the other good stuff that we're doing, yeah, because we don't want to focus on the stick, right? And I think it's really important that we talk about the holistic nature of what we're doing. Remember, guys, 3 years ago, we had people sleeping on the streets in Uptown Charlotte. Literally. And they're still doing that, Tent City. And there's, right, and the point I'm trying to make is that Uptown Charlotte, and I represent a portion of it with Ms. Anderson, is where people go to work, they live there, and they play there. And we've been talking about quality of life issues in Uptown Charlotte that goes beyond just the unhoused population for well over a year and a half, 3 years going back to Tent City. And I just want to make sure that the community knows and the council knows that every time we're not starting from scratch, right? We're kind of, we address the issue of Tent City. We address the issue by forming a community-wide task force, city, county, nonprofit organizations. The manager was a part of that. I was a part of that. The mayor was a part of it. Huge corporate leadership in Uptown Charlotte create this strategy, a home for all, which focuses on housing as well as homelessness, and made those recommendations and gave it to the United Way to carry out. So there's a series of things that we have done over the last 3 years to specifically address homelessness and housing, specifically in Uptown Charlotte, because it is our corporate living room. It's where the region comes to play, where people actually live there. And I represent Uptown just as strong as I represent Bayswood Road, or Mountain Island Lake, Coolwood, right? They deserve the same type of representation in terms of issues relating to their quality of life. This issue really came to fruition, I think, last April, right? And I went to a fourth ward meeting last May and started beating up the manager immediately, right? And so we've come, this train has been slowly moving while the residents of Uptown has experienced not only issues related to unhoused population, but crime in general that has nothing to do with the unhoused population, right? There are a series of issues and things that we have to begin to take a look at, like with the conversions. Crime in Uptown Charlotte, which is down 7%, but the perception is that it's an unsafe place to be. The millions of dollars of investments that we'll be making in Uptown Charlotte, Spectrum Arena being one of them, right? We just did that a year ago, almost $250 million. Transit that we're investing in Uptown Charlotte. Talking about public incentives for conversion in Uptown Charlotte. So at some point, we have to respond to the emails that we're receiving from our residents, right? And do it in a way that it's not just a stick, but it's both, the carrot and the stick. And we're doing a lot of good things to address the issues on the ground from a grassroots perspective. Last year, Councilmember Brown, we were able to give $500,000 to Block Love Charlotte to do intrusive grassroots type of work to help with the homeless population in Uptown Charlotte. Some of the recommendations that you see out here in terms of street outreach and the public restrooms we've been talking about for months. So I'm glad that the management team is catching up with some of the recommendations that a lot of us have been saying that we need to have a holistic response to this issue. And so I think it's really good, Sean, that you really kind of walk us through in terms of historically what we have done, what we are currently doing, the issues that are in front of us, but more importantly, that we have to be proactive to responding to citizens who live in uptown Charlotte. 3 weeks ago, we had a community meeting in uptown one morning. Property owners, property managers, residents, and the stories they're telling, notwithstanding the unhoused population, about their personal experience in uptown Charlotte was chilling. And so I think that the ordinance is a small step forward. The officers will use a whole lot of discretion, right, in carrying it out. I'm not sure there's a need for us to delay implementation, right? I think everyone kind of knows there's been certainly a lot of heads up for the last 3 months where we're headed. I talked to Liz over the weekend. I read her editorial today. I think she would appreciate what we're saying, because these are exactly the conversation that we've had. So I think a lot of the things that many in the industry are looking for, street outreach, more supportive services, public access to facilities, and my strong support for a home for all, which we didn't really have an opportunity to discuss at the retreat. But again, it would be political malpractice for us to invest all that time over the last 2 years to produce this report and not take it across the finish line by making sure that it's funded appropriately. And now that we're having, I think, a meaningful conversation with Mecklenburg County about how we can actually work together to get this thing done. And so I will support the ordinance because I support my residents in uptown Charlotte. And I want to support the investments that we've already made in uptown Charlotte. And I want to change the perception that uptown Charlotte is not safe. At the same time, I also want to provide all the type of support necessary to make sure people help themselves, right? And so I'm willing to invest more with Block Love Charlotte in this fiscal year. I'm willing to invest in a home for all. I would love to build, Sean, more SRO housing, right, where folks can live and get the services they need right there, which I talked about how do we redefine our housing trust fund, right? How do we use those dollars differently? And so I think this is a win-win, right? None of what we're doing is easy, right? I don't want to say there's winners or losers. And what we're doing is just responding to what we're seeing on the ground. And I think the response that we are giving the community by putting the ordinance back in play is appropriate. And certainly I think all the things that just outlined in terms of the strategies that we can utilize in conjunction with the county as well as other grassroots organizations, those folks are doing the work. I think it's the right direction that we need to go in. Now, I am not a lawyer, so I won't pretend to play one, but I am certainly disappointed about the parking lots and the drug activities ordinance being pulled away from it. I'm not sure my lawyer's at the end of the table, Mr. Baker. I mean, no disrespect, Jessica, but do we have any options? I think we need to, because a lot of the conversations I get are from parking lot owners who email me saying, listen, my parking lot is a wreck because of loitering and defecation and people there that shouldn't be there. The car break-ins in uptown Charlotte, a lot are coming from the parking lots themselves. So I heard the attorney's explanation about why we shouldn't. Police chief pulled it away, but certainly those two ordinances seems to be, I think, should be included with the rest. Help me understand why we shouldn't.
I think the long and short of it, and this is a constitutional law class that could last for 3 months on some of these issues as it relates to panhandling and loitering and speech issues. In fact, the Supreme Court's going to be taking up a case shortly coming out of Oregon on a number of homeless issues that relate to loitering and where they can be and where they can't be. The main issue is that if there's criminal activity going on, there's going to be some sort of crime happening. It's not just the standing around that's going to be the issue. They're going to be standing around to do something. So there are some opportunities there to address the actual crime that may be committed, as opposed to trying to anticipate what their intent is, keeping in mind that crimes, there's this thing called mens rea, which is, what is your intent to do something? And if you're not intending to do something, if I'm just, standing around, walking around, because I just want to get out of the sun, I just want to walk around the parking deck, the question is, am I walking around the parking deck to do a drug deal or to break into a car, or am I doing something else? And that's where the issue is of asking the officers then to guess what the intent of the particular individual is. And if there's criminal activity going on, there are other crimes and other enforcement mechanisms that can be used there. So it's just a tricky situation. I don't know how much that particular ordinance was being used anyway. I think there are some anecdotal evidence that I think they're really focused on the other crimes that are happening as opposed to standing around.
So, again, I'm a layman, so why can't we just push the envelope and say, okay, we're going to include it? What would that do?
I mean, it's been on before.
Yes, it's been on before.
So the
so it's
issue.
nothing-
The issue ultimately is, I would assume that the police department would, use their discretion and not just trying to guess at somebody's mens rea, but that would actually be focused on what their actions are.
But the other 6 were discretionary as well, right? Like the young lady who was smoking the marijuana, the officer didn't use any discretion. She just went straight to the point, right? So it's discretion, right?
And I hear you, and that's just our recommendation because of the trying to keep the officers out of those situations where we can. But the reality is that life requires them to make those types of decisions all the time. We just try to avoid them when we can.
So the committee did vote for those 2, and then the chief sent a letter saying, I take those 2 back. Have the committee already voted on those 2?
What's up?
Yes, that was the way that it transpired.
So the committee has voted on it?
Yes, and then the chief provided the memo last week with the revised recommendations. Yes.
So the committee hadn't voted to take back those 2? I'm just asking.
That's correct.
I'm just causing a mess. Okay, so the council votes should stand, right? I'm just making a mess. I'm just asking, right?
Yeah.
I'm just, okay.
So just as the committee valued Chief Jennings' initial memo, and I'm not speaking about the committee right now, I think at a bare minimum, having your police chief and your city attorney giving you caution about 2 of them is just something to consider.
I have enormous amount of respect for the chief, no doubt about it, and Jessica and our city attorney. But, process matters too, right? I'm just saying.
It's okay.
I'm just saying.
That's going to delay it by another month.
I will say this too, in regards to that. At the end of the day, what comes out of the committee is a recommendation.
Exactly.
And it can be modified in whatever
Sure,
way that ultimately the council is going to support.
I'm being Malcolm tonight.
You're being what?
I'm just being silly tonight. I'm just trying to prove, again, listen, I think at some point for this council and for me, as we move forward, we should not be afraid of the unknown on a wide variety of issues, because I think that's where we are as a community, right? We got to make decisions and not worry what's going to happen if we do something in Raleigh or we just got to not be so cautious. And I'm telling you, a lot of the emails, a lot of the constituents I've talked to, a lot of the activities I'm hearing are centered around these parking lots. Just a point.
Understood, and thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you. Ms. Brown, I heard you. I want to explain why I'm arriving at a different conclusion. I don't think anybody could accuse this council of having a lack of concern for people in difficult circumstances. And we heard about all of the efforts that are being made to provide early intervention to avoid the situation where it ever gets to where some of these offenses, every which way. I don't believe we are criminalizing poverty or homelessness. I believe we are criminalizing behaviors. And there are many people who are in poverty or homeless who don't engage in these behaviors. There are some people who aren't, that do. So we're talking about the behaviors. And we have a huge spectrum of ways in which to try to avoid to let it getting to this point where those behaviors are occurring in non-enforcement ways, ways that show concern for the circumstances of the people involved. But at some point, as a last resort, at the end, you tried this, and you tried this, and you did this, and you did this, and the officer said, please don't do that. And at some point, you have got to have the ability to actively intervene. And I believe there's an obligation on us to send to the rest of the community here who don't want to see those behaviors taking place, that we appreciate them too, that we will not send a message out to everybody that we think it's okay for them and their children to see these behaviors. So I'm very hopeful in every instance that we get there before this happens. But there has to be a point at which we can just prevent it from happening. And so that's why I reach my conclusion. I do think that we have also an obligation to our officers, notwithstanding the instance of bad behavior that you mentioned, but the officers are being challenged by members of the public to do something when these things happen. And as it stands now, they're powerless to do that. I would like to have them use restraint, but be backed up with the authority to take action if their requests and polite intervention is disregarded. So I will be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Bakari?
Thank you. So within the spirit of this discussion being, how do we get to 11, right? Because well, that's the purpose, right? We'll give it a try. I think the writing on the wall seems to me like we could maybe squeak out, if not have a couple extra votes for the list that's there, maybe even the list that was tabled without the rest of the process. But as I'm listening around the room, you know, there are three parts to this, where if we had a magic wand and everyone could, and every one of these were solved perfectly, one being not allowing it on our streets, having the teeth necessary. Two being, how do we not do it that's not in the spirit of criminalizing things? And then three, how do we have the best wraparound services in the world that the folks who need it, either homelessness or panhandling, are getting it? I mean, everyone is aligned to either all or one more so of all three of those things. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we continue forward in the path that's here, keep marching forward, but I think there's more strength with 11 votes on something like that, and more we can do beyond what's just here as a follow-on step. So I just took a stab at writing kind of, you know, what would a outcome statement or a mission statement, if you will, look like that encapsulate all that in the form of like a homeless and panhandling New Deal, what we're going to do differently than everybody else. And this is real rough, but completely complying with the Constitution, obviously, and I think there are ways that we can absolutely do that within what has been said here. We mandate that no loitering, outdoor sleeping, or panhandling be allowed in Charlotte, full stop. So long as, one, we're not criminalizing the vast majority of interactions we have with the public in this space, and two, we are proactively providing the vast majority of wraparound services that are needed and in a best-in-class manner worldwide. So I think, like, it's simple to say that, but when you get into the weeds of, all right, what does staff figure out and how do we move forward, I think the ordinances, we solve for the First Amendment things, and respectfully, you know, it's not a First Amendment problem if I walk in the middle of a 4-lane intersection from a safety perspective to handle this. I find it hard to believe we can't justify and find reasons why safety-wise, you know, the median isn't any different. But even beyond that, I think when we combine it with, we're not saying you can't ask for help, which is the crux of the First Amendment piece here. We're saying there are better, more optimal places that we are going to lead the world in, whether it's a roof above or men's shelter or different bathroom facilities that we put around. But the point here being, we have to take that as seriously as we take vetting the ordinances and putting them out there. And then we figure out the protocols in place where, one, this is just about primarily, first, hopefully empowering with more teeth, but discretion like we talked about. But the manager and I have briefly discussed this. Perhaps the second escalation from there is, and this is the wrong word, I don't have the right word for it, a homeless court, if you will. Not a criminalized criminal system court, but a place that's more responsible with kind of awareness of the resources and routing people to the proper places where they need the help. Because I find there's going to be a lot of people that probably don't know about the resources. And then once you get through all that, you're at the bottom percentage of people who just don't want the help. And that's a different problem than I think we're facing today. And then finally, yes, the judicial system. But if we could figure out how to minimize that, I think we'd be in a really good spot. And then, like I said, focus really hard on what is a best-in-class kind of nation-leading wraparound services approach, where we're funding those who are doing the great work, and we have that backlog filled, and we're finding the gaps where there aren't programs there. To me, that's an 11-0 approach. Perhaps people are not interested in, and you know, we have gone through approaches in the past where we've had narrow margins, and they're always dicey. So if there's a way, Marcus, Mr. Manager, that we could have a takeaway, or even if we do march forward, and I think we should pass both of these, we don't stop there, because when the items come up, as they definitely will down the road, where we have an issue that we're navigating, a 6-5 council is going to be a lot harder to navigate a response to something we've created, which will happen, than an 11-0, because we knew that we found common ground there. Maybe that's too much of a pipe dream, but I think it's possible.
Thank you, Mr. Bakari, and thank you for trying to get us to a place where, you know, we can all agree that this is good for the city. Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you. So I actually have a number of questions for you. So, one, it was mentioned by Councilmember Graham, the allocation to United Way a number of years ago. When was the last update that we received regarding our funding from the United Way? Do you know? Or manager, do you know?
Yes, United Way spoke to the Housing Safety and Community Committee last year to provide an update.
It will be helpful if that information can be sent back out, because what I'm trying to remember is, have all the funds been expended? And if not, where are we financial-wise, and exactly what have they done to address this? I'm also trying to get an understanding. If we go back, I think it's 2 slides, you identified that we're talking about helping to do the repairs on the Hope Vibes van, which has been down for a while. I'm trying to understand how we got to that. And it might not even be on the slide. I think it was in what you were sharing with us.
Sorry, yeah.
So, yes. So I'm trying to understand how we got to the place of it being a consideration that our funds help to repair your vehicle versus us just working with Project Outpour.
So this was really a desire to collaborate with the county to take an asset that's currently out of operation and get it back on the road. That doesn't preclude us from also considering opportunities to work with Project Outpour.
So it would be nice to know what these dollar amounts are, opposed to just this large overview. Again, 2/3 of our taxes go to the county. 1/3 of your taxes come from the city. The city has historically stepped in and funded a lot of programs. Financially, the county is in a very different situation today than it was 20 years ago, than it was 15 years ago. Not to mention the county did institute their tax increase. We have not for a number of years. There has to be somewhere in this conversation of collaboration and partnership, not always meaning the city is going to cut a check. There's other ways for us to collaborate and to be at the table. It would be very helpful to know what this financial ask is, because again, for us, it may be more beneficial for us to look at the relationship with Project Outpour, which has also already been in the community for a number of years doing really good work in partnership with the libraries, which is also a county resource. So we're still partnering, but without knowing what the cost of this van repair is, that's a hard challenge for me to just say, well, we're going to partner without knowing what's that dollar amount and what does that look like for us in this contribution. The Hearts.
Councilmember Mayfield, if I may, I mean, with Hearts for the Invisible, we're contemplating a contract that would be up to $500,000 in support of street outreach. With the rental subsidies, that's $1 million of tenant-based rental assistance on an annual basis. And the idea is that we would devote a portion of that towards the clients referred from the unhoused population in Uptown Charlotte. With supportive services, that would be $250,000 devoted to activate the supportive services in tandem with the rental subsidies. With the public restrooms, the porta-johns, of course, are a fairly modest expense, but we can do 3 or 4 porta-johns for $25,000 to $30,000 for a 6-month basis. So in each one of these instances, we have specific numbers. The county is showing up in a big way in collaboration across the board on really number 1, number 3, and then everything under Home for All. The county is right there, front and center, advancing this work in a meaningful way. So I just don't want to leave anybody under the impression that Charlotte is being asked to carry the water on all of this stuff.
I appreciate that. Those numbers being shared with everyone will be helpful. The question that I was going to have for Hearts for the Invisible is, one, they're located off of University City Boulevard. Their regular hours are 9 to 5. Having that breakdown of what those additional, what the expectation is, knowing that here's the reality. For a lot of people, and there are numerous reports and studies that have been done of the window of crisis. And that window of crisis isn't necessarily 9 to 5 through business hours. It's more in the evening, overnight, weekends. Having a better understanding of what their hours and the expectations are going to be, and what that financial cost is going to be, what budget line item is coming out of. We already have a lot of funding in rental subsidies. To me, the conversation would be, okay, we're going to allocate some of the rental subsidies that we already currently invest in over here versus we're talking about a new line item to cover rental subsidies and supportive services. We fund a lot of supportive services as well as rental subsidies. So what would that look like to say, okay, well, 10 of these that we've already funded, because unfortunately they haven't been able to be utilized, are going to be reallocated for this particular need, versus trying to create a new funding line item for it. That is a very different conversation for me. Again, I also want to understand, we have an MSD in Uptown. So are we talking about the funds to cover this additional resources and support that is targeted specifically for Uptown? Are we saying that we have identified through budget, which we already know, here's the MSD from University, from South Park, from everywhere, from the MSD of Center City, of Uptown, from their MSD, this is how much we are allocating to address the needs that they have in their area, because your businesses are already paying an additional tax in order to help with certain things. Now, yes, we could say it's for hospitality and tourism. We can also say it's for safety and for the growth and the betterment of the area. Yes, sir.
So, thank you, Councilmember Mayfield. Boy, did you open up a lot just now. So let me go back in time. My timelines, I totally align with Councilmember Graham, but it's pretty close. So we've been talking about this for, I want to take a giant step back, just if I can just have a minute. There's been a lot going on around safety in this council for a while, and it seems that Dr. Watlington is in the center of each time we have one of these conversations, whether it's Safe Charlotte, or whether it's some things that we're doing in the Center City, or whether it's the last referral to the committee. So a lot of good things all across the spectrum as it's related to safety. So I'll park that. You're exactly right, okay? You have agreements with your MSDs, and with those MSDs, there's a series of things that those dollars can be invested in. And that's a conversation I think this council can have. I think Ms. Wallington started it during the last budget discussion, but we did, so much was going on. This past October, I think it was around October, we talked about ARPA and interest that we had from the ARPA dollars, and we're over $6 million of just that interest. And we said anything that happened around safety, when we were ready, we could use some of that instead of opening up the budget. So I will tell you that Sean's been very, very good with looking at other sources, redeploying sources from whether CDBG, federal funds, things of that nature, as opposed to jumping into that. But that has been an opportunity. If the council had to do something quick, whether it's around, the unhoused, whether it's around, public safety, that would be there. The last thing I'll say is this. Absolutely, I'm swimming in a lane that typically isn't the city's lane. But I don't see how not to swim there right now, because whether you use terms like carrot and stick, it just seems like a holistic approach is the right way to do it. And we want to bring as many people along with us trying to have a holistic approach. But I hear you loud and clearly about what's happening with different budgets and allocations of funds.
Thank you for that, Mr. Manager. ARPA funds are limited. Those are one-offs. We have partner allocations that we made last year for ARPA funds, where in this upcoming budget, we're going to have discussions of how do we either incorporate them into the budget, or for what ARPA funds we have remaining, what are the commitments to it? It will be very helpful, because this is an ongoing issue. This isn't a one-off. The concerns that are in Uptown are also in University. They're also in South Park. They're in Ballantyne. They're at Phillips Place. They're all over. So whatever we decide, as Councilmember Bakari loves to share, needs to be something that can be replicated and easily. When we have these MSDs, it seems to me that our conversation would be around how do we better direct the funds to address the needs that you have, versus us creating a new line item that may or may not be there in the future. If I'm asking about these partners, I'm asking for a very clear reason. Because if you're set up in the University area, but you're going to come in and do work in Uptown, what does that work look like? Is that a 60-40 split? Is that an 80-20 split? Again, 2/3 versus 1/3. We have a lot of needs. The county has a lot of needs. Right now, the county has access to a few more resources than what we have. So we need to be very, which we don't like to talk about. Yeah, we're the big brother in the room, but sometimes big brother needs a little help too. So I want to make sure that we're not making commitments that future councils are going to be held responsible for, and having a clear understanding of how we choose A over B. Again, we have a vehicle that has been down, and I respect the fact that we want to help. But what does that help look like if we're talking about immediate assistance and we have another company over here that's already been doing it? Let's contract with them. Let's get it started. What is it going to look like to do these repairs? Hell, I just asked you for money 2 nights ago for a business, so I'm not knocking the idea of it, but I still want equity in the conversation. And unfortunately, the questions that I haven't heard up to this point speak to some of these very specific pieces. So, and we very well may have been shared the dollars. It would be helpful to get those dollars sent back out, because we're getting ready to come up on our budget conversations. And I don't want there to be a misinterpretation. Well, council approved us moving forward with this, so we've allocated this amount to go towards this. So you telling me something else of importance that's an immediate give back to the community might not happen because we made this decision? Let's just look at where these dollars and cents potentially are coming from for the long term. because this isn't a one-off, short answer, and to understand who are these partners. We don't need new ones. But if we have one of these partners is a partner that started through United Way, have you exhausted all of your funding? Because we've already paid you. So it's not new. We've given you money to do a job. We funded a program that you said, here is where I want to see this work happen in the community. We don't need to put ourselves in a position where we are then funding from multiple sources the same work that should be getting done, especially if the work has not been getting done at the level that we anticipated or expected. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington?
I think that every person here has said some version of what I have been thinking about. What I would like to do in the spirit of what is supposed to be this process, I just want to make sure that we come back to the notion that what we're discussing here are the consideration of these ordinances as part of a holistic strategy, right? Certainly there's much more that we can discuss in terms of the holistic strategy itself, but that's not what's on the floor right now. So I just want to make sure that as we think about what the next path forward is for council, do we want this recriminalization of these particular ordinances, whether it's 6 or if there's appetite for 8, to be a part of that holistic strategy? And I'm not sure what the outcome of this conversation is supposed to be. I get the sense, just from conversations that I'm having with council members, that there is sufficient and solid support to move forward. So in the spirit of that, I hope that we do exactly that. And as it relates to the rest of the overall strategy, certainly there's more work to be done. And out of consideration for everyone's time, I will leave it there.
Thank you, Ms. Watlington. This has been a really good discussion, and I want to thank everyone for their comments and everything they brought to the table. As was just mentioned, we are discussing the ordinances specifically as one piece of an overall holistic, multi-pronged strategy to address this issue and this challenge. So I believe that everyone has had an opportunity to speak to the issue. Sean, thank you. Ms. Battle, thank you for your comments. And unless we have, Ms. Brown has one quick comment before we close out.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I don't know if it's going to be quick. I'm going to be heard out of respect for my voice. So I heard a lot going around the room, and it was about the ordinances, the things that I've heard. I heard, Councilmember Graham said he's very dear, and you work in District 1, you and Dante. Mayor Pro Tem, that's great. I work in District 3. I got a ton of emails I can send to you where people are concerned about things going down in District 3. Do we care about District 3 the same way we care about downtown Charlotte? Do we care about putting the ordinance out there? I know that Sean, Mr. Heath said something about their citywide things that are going on and that they've implemented those. If we gave $500,000 to Block Love, let's give another $500,000. And I do have some numbers that I just want to share. But while I'm doing that and we're going through it, the humane response would be to have restrooms downtown so that people that don't have the ability to come and ask to have a restroom put down there. 2 restrooms, porta johns. We'll see how far we get with that. The real issue that I have is that we move fast on this, really fast, and then we have to come back because some things were unconstitutional. It will behoove us, all of the intelligent individuals that are sitting around this table, to be able to go and do the research before we put it out there to know that something is unconstitutional. If I speak truth to power, I knew that some of these things were going to bite us. But what do I know? The thing about me being on this council and things happening last April, okay. I got sworn in on December the 5th. What happened in last April? Y'all worked on it, right? It's a slow-moving train, as you said. I want everybody to go back to the time when they first came to city council. You didn't have all the knowledge that you think you have today. And so the thing that bothers me is I was elected to this council just like everybody else. I have a voice, and I'm going to use it for whatever I think I feel and I need to express my concerns for, not what nobody else think. You know, when we're at a meeting and there's the whispering and the laughing when I'm talking, that is the most disrespectful thing I've seen, and I can't remember when. As someone that is a member of this body, it's very infuriating. And so the experts would say simply that those that are closest to the problems are going to have the solutions. But the problem is we leave them out often. We leave them out too often. I'm going to close with this, and I'm going to recuse myself on presenting the numbers, because what I'm getting ready to say is more important than any number I could produce. There were rumors that there was whispering that you guys were going to have a convicted felon come to the council. The way some of the behaviors that I see, I would have to say that I believe that that whispering was going on in the room behind my back before I came. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And I want to say that, you know, we made some really good traction with our retreat and some of our processes that we stood up in terms of how we operated the meetings during the retreat. And all of you received a memo from the mayor about potentially adopting some of those processes and behaviors on a go-forward basis, so all council members feel like they have a voice and can duly represent the residents that they were voted in to represent. So I just want to make sure, just as a body, that I state that before we close out the meeting. All right, if we don't have any other comments, can I get a motion to adjourn? All right, everyone go home. Have a good evening.